Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Radical Candor Podcast. I'm Kim Scott.
I'm Jason Rosoff.
I'm Amy Sandler. And, we talk a lot on this podcast about how managers can ensure that their employees are staying engaged at work. But what about keeping those managers themselves engaged? Being a boss is a challenging job in the best of times. The best of times, these are not. According to Gallup, only 31% of managers are actively engaged, and more than 50% are actively seeking new jobs amid declines in employee engagement and well-being, record turnover and hiring rates, and an unprecedented increase in hybrid work. Kim, in Radical Candor, you say that a boss's job is to guide a team to achieve results. However, in the current landscape of constant disruptions, this job is feeling close to impossible for some managers. And what's more, those very same disengaged managers are leading to disengaged teams. And what we're really talking about in many ways, and for a lot of folks, is burnout. And according to the National Institutes of Health, burnout is a psychological syndrome emerging as a prolonged response to chronic interpersonal stressors on the job. The three key dimensions of this response are an overwhelming exhaustion, check, feelings of cynicism and detachment from the job, and a sense of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment. I just had one of those. I just had the exhaustion. But
I've been feeling cynical. I've been struggling with my feelings of cynicism. I don't know about detachment, but sometimes it's hard not to feel cynical in this world.
Yeah, and it's interesting also on that sense of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment, because I know for you, one of the things we talk a lot about is like you want to feel like what you're doing has an impact.
Yes, and some days I feel like. Well, I don't know anybody who feels like they're having all the impact that they want to have. And honestly, if they are, they're probably having too much impact. Like I think we all like there's one of my favorite books of all times is this book by Ian McEwan, and Enduring Love it's called. And it begins with this sort of tragic situation where somebody is piloting a hot air balloon and it gets out of control and there's all these people like trying to help out and the narrator of the book says, I feel certain that if I were the uncontested leader, the tragedy would not have happened. And I feel that way all the time. And yet at the same time, I also know that if I were the uncontested leader, all this shit would be happening anyway. Like the solution is not to be the uncontested leader, even though I think it's a very much of this human imagination. We all like to think if we were in charge of the world, it would be a better place.
Yeah, I'm curious, Jason, as you're listening to the definition from burnout, just where are you checking in on this with these three key dimensions, the overwhelming exhaustion, the feelings of cynicism and detachment from the job, and the sense of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment?
I would say I'm with Kim. I'm feeling a little cynical, but otherwise I'm not ticking any of the boxes. I don't feel overwhelmingly exhausted. I certainly don't feel detached from the job, and I feel like we have accomplished a lot. And I feel like I also personally have accomplished a lot over the last year. So I think when in all arenas you're feeling sort of ineffective, the other things come as a result. You know what I'm saying? Like if you feel like you can't get anything done in your personal life and your professional life, like that's to me what leads to the cynicism and detachment. And then I become exhausted, like because I'm just sort of like not looking forward at any point to getting back up and doing it over again. You know what I'm saying? So I think it feels like you're in a hamster wheel. It's easy to become cynical and exhausted.
Yeah. And I think the reason why I have been feeling cynical, I mean, there's one specific thing that has happened in the last couple of weeks that has really got me, that has got me thinking. So maybe you can help me feel less cynical about the world as a result. I mean, I don't know why sometimes these little things happen and they they affect me more profoundly than perhaps they should. But I was dealing with two different leadership situations where the CEO of the organizations objected to the word safety. They were like, "Don't use the word safety. I don't believe in psychological safety." And I'm just like, "What the hell is wrong with you people? That you like what is this about?" So maybe you all could help me have more compassion for those leaders, and then I would feel less cynical. I think it really is when I feel at my most cynical is when I have my least is usually when I have no compassion for what this person is like. What would cause a leader to object to safety?
In some ways, it's partially a response to the topic that we're discussing. I think that if your job is to be a sort of shock absorber for your team, and you are out of compassion for them, I think it's really easy to become cynical that you making the environment better for them is actually making a difference, right? Because they're all still going to be bringing their issue, like, your team is still going to be bringing issues to you. There's issues in the world, like it's all a big mess. And so I could imagine getting into a state where I feel like, well, that what I'm doing isn't working for them, and it's certainly not working for me because I'm getting burned out. So, like, screw all of that.
Yeah.
We're just not going to worry about this stuff anymore, and let's see what happens. It's a little bit like some people get enamored with the idea that when the rules that you have don't work, that chaos is a better alternative. It's hard to sort of calculate, as opposed to
Yes.
saying the hard work is to figure out new rules that will make
Yeah.
it better.
Yeah.
Instead, we're just going to lean into chaos.
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And there was a report, it was called the Future Forum Pulse Report. It was a survey of almost 11,000 workers across the US, Australia, France, Germany, Japan, and the UK. Kim, I'm curious, were those leaders based in the US or somewhere
US.
else?
Yeah.
US based.
Not just
And
US. They were like Silicon Valley.
if we may be even more specific. And this Future Forum Pulse report found that executives' sentiment and experience scores had sunk to record lows. And this was compared to a year ago. Execs reported a 15% decline in the working environment, 20% drop in work-life balance, and a 40% increase in work-related stress and anxiety. And the VP and co-founder of Future Forum, Sheila Subramian, said, quote, "We're in the midst of the biggest workplace paradigm shift we're likely to see in our lifetimes, and leaders are feeling that pressure." And she added that the shifting macroeconomic conditions, great resignation, which we've talked about on other podcasts, and the changing demands of employees around flexibility make it, quote, "harder to lead with confidence. You can no longer rely on the old leadership playbooks." And I'm wondering if we also add in not just the changing demands of employees around flexibility, but also perhaps around psychological safety and maybe a sense of how can I know for my thousands of employees what psychological safety is going to look like for each individual person. And I think it goes back to what Jason was saying of just this sense of like, I can't please everyone and I can't make it all work for everyone. And so it can feel overwhelming. Thinking back to the conversation we had around Amy Edmondson, with Amy Edmondson on psychological safety, and this idea that it might actually land very differently for individual people. And I'm also wondering if there's any intergenerational challenge around that. Like, well, I didn't have psychological safety when I was becoming a leader, and now people are wanting, I don't know if there's any pushback on that.
I'll add one other observation, which is that it could be an objection to the word safety. I think that there is a core tenet, and maybe it's like confusing intellectual safety and psychological safety. I think maybe those two ideas might be conflated here as well. It might lead to an objection. There's a liberal idea that we shouldn't foster intellectual safety, right? The liberal idea is like we live in a market of ideas, and in a market of ideas, our goal is to share them as clearly as we possibly can, and to have those ideas sort of like fight with one another to come up with some way forward, right? To find a way forward. And I think people hear that there's a thing that is happening right now, which is there's a debate going on to the degree to which we should create intellectual safety, the ability to sort of like live inside of a bubble and not have to worry about what people who don't agree with you think, et cetera. And so I think there's on the far end of liberal is libertarian, and I think there's like a high degree of overlap between especially like leadership in Silicon Valley and sort of like libertarian values. And this is like, I think, a battleground there. And the difference between intellectual safety and psychological safety is really important, because psychological safety is what's required to get people to feel confident that they can actually voice their idea. In order to create intellectual combat, like to actually get the ideas to stand up against each other, people need to feel psychologically safe to share their ideas, to feel like I can say what I need to say without feeling like I'm going to be cast out of the tribe.
Yeah, I think also there's a lot of confusion between safety, comfort, and shame. And I think like there so I think that often in order to be able to embrace the discomfort, you need to feel safe. Like and feeling unsafe is very different from feeling uncomfortable. Like we have to feel uncomfortable in order to grow. And that to me, when I hear psychological safety, I imagine a world in which that it is safe to be uncomfortable. And I think that's not always what other people are hearing. And I also think that when we are challenged, especially when we're challenged if we've said or done something that's biased, that is uncomfortable, but I think it goes beyond discomfort. I think there we feel ashamed. And in that case, we have to own our own shame. You can't expect that other people are going to prevent you from ever feeling ashamed, because that's like the path to deep denial. And so I think that sometimes there's a lot of confusion around those three things.
But I think this conversation is just an interesting example of why it's so hard to be a manager right now. Because,
Yes.
like, to some degree, like, these are deep sort of social fabric, societal questions. Like, what is the social contract? You know what I'm saying? Like, and I think what the author of the Foreign Pulse report was getting at is like, there's a shift that's happening as to sort of like what is a part of work and what is not a part of work. You know what I'm saying? Like what should people be able to say at work or not able to say or not be able to say at work? And I don't think leaders had the tools to lead in the world before this shift happened. Like I don't think they were well equipped to lead before the shift happened. And I think the shift is making things worse.
Yes, and I think there's another confounding factor in the shift. It's not only just macroeconomic conditions and the great resignation and the changing demands of employees, but I think there's a real shift in sort of what leadership means and what good leadership looks like. And that's the shift from the old sort of command and control uh, sort of approach to leadership to a new, more relationship based approach to leadership. And I think a lot of people, when they become managers for the first time, they kind of fall back on this old command and control, and they expect people to to do what they say. And people don't, that I don't think it's ever happened that people do what a leader says automatically. But people are more likely to be I think in today's world, especially younger employees, but even some older employees are more likely to say, no, I'm not going to do that. And I think a lot of leaders then feel a sense of humiliation when they get that kind of feedback. And you must do what I say. And then people are like, no, I don't. No, I don't. And so I think like reminding leaders that telling people what to do doesn't work, silencing people doesn't work, is part of the solution to the burnout.
Kim, it's really interesting. I'm wondering, with the examples you started with the couple of leaders who were pushing back on the idea of safety, aware that we're not necessarily sure exactly what safety means in their minds, unless you have more to add from what Jason said. But I'm curious, as you talk about the philosophical kind of what's underneath this, your belief, our belief that telling people what to do doesn't work, which, by the way, I think because you are inherently a rebel, telling you what to do doesn't work. But I do think there's like, I don't know the data, but some group of people who, and I'm more of a rule follower than you, that, if my manager tells me to do something, I'm inclined to do something because I want to sort of follow the rules. Not that that's always
Yes.
a good idea.
Yes, and if your manager asks you what you think should be done, they're more likely to get a better idea. They're more likely to get better
absolutely.
work out of you, which is why telling me what to do doesn't work for one reason. Telling you what to do doesn't work for us. Like you might do it. Like it doesn't work for me because I won't do it. It might work for you because you will do it, but either way, we don't get.
But not as well, and I'll be like
Yeah.
seething with resentment,
And
and so I'm
eventually you'll quit.
Yes, that is true. That is true. If I have other options and
Yeah.
all of that. I think what's interesting also about what you were saying was around, and again, only to the extent that this is helpful and you have more specifics, but the folks that you're imagining, do you think that their philosophy is more command and control rather than collaborative?
I think in one case this manager who is really flaming out, and part of the reason for the flame out is that they're taking a command and control approach to the situation, and it is not working.
It's like I have a chicken and egg question in my mind, which is like, which is it the flame out that's leading to the command and control, or is it the command and control that's leading to the flame out?
Really good, yeah.
Because I feel like as a natural human reaction, at least most of the humans that I know, when things feel out of control, you try to take control where you can.
Yes.
And this is a place, especially, speaking as the CEO of a company, it feels like, I feel like I have a, reasonable amount of power in this situation. And so shouldn't I be able to control what's going on? And I could imagine a situation where I was feeling desperate enough that would come out in some way, shape, or form, that would be my reaction, my response to a situation feeling out of control would be to try to exert control. And I think what you're saying, Kim, that I strongly agree with, is that there are unintended consequences of making that choice. Meaning, to Amy's point, you might be able to control some people, but you're going to wind up pissing off a whole lot of people that you absolutely need not to piss off in order for you to have any semblance of, in order to reduce the loss of control that you're feeling.
Yeah, and I would say what's happening in the situation that I'm thinking of is this this leader is feeling out of control. You're right. Some stuff went wrong, and so trying to exert control and thereby losing, thereby having to confront like quite explicitly that they're not in control. And therefore feeling more, it's a vicious cycle, feeling more out of control. So trying even harder to exert control. And this leader who is afraid of revolution is fomenting revolution, like with their actions. That this leader is creating exactly what they fear will happen with their actions. And it's just so unnecessary.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the value of having, you being able to observe it from the outside, and Jason, your point was such a good one. It's interesting because going back to that Future Foreign Pulse report, this was from fall 2022, I think it still stands. One of their key recommendations was for leaders to lead with trust by offering more choice and flexibility. And I know we talked about this before with the the Great Resignation and quiet quitting, but Kim, it seems like the last thing this person is open to doing is leading with trust by offering choice and flexibility.
No.
That would
No, that's not in this leader's bag of tricks, nor is compassion. And like one of the things that's so horrible about the situation is that I talked to this leader's boss, and this leader's boss said, well, this person is, more of a quantitative person and not very good at showing they care personally. And but you got to give them a pass because they're good at other things. And, I don't think even the leader, at this point, I think this leader is not going to succeed. So the leader will go whether they want to or not. But the problem is that if this leader's boss wanted to support this leader, then what the leader's boss would have done is to say, here are some ways, like there's a gap in your skill set. This is not something you're good at. And here are some things that you could either delegate, you could have someone else like lead these specific meetings, you could come up with an ideas team. There are a lot of ways to help a person navigate around skills that they don't have and still be successful. But that's not what is happening. This leader's boss thought, I have to have this leader's back by denying that there's any problem. And so it's a tragic situation. And I feel it's not one that I'm able to do anything. I'm not able to fix it. And it's very hard for me to watch it happen.
Having been on both sides of like the outside looking in and the person who is struggling to figure out how to support a leader who is failing, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, it's hard.
I think what you're describing, back to the sort of like feedback versus future focused, guidance. That this question of, are we looking backwards to say what's going wrong? Or are we looking forwards to say like how it could go different in the future? And I think what part of what you're saying is like this person it's like the worst of all worlds. They're not discussing what went wrong, and they're also not making suggestions about how the future could be better.
Yeah.
And so we're recreating the problem over and over again.
Yeah, and making it worse. And this leader is burning out, and their team is burning out even faster. When a leader is burnt out, it usually happens that their team is even more burnt out. That burnout is something that rolls downhill, and it's like a snowball. It's worse at the bottom of the hill than at the top.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. Yeah, when you were talking about sort of, is this leader resourced to actually handle it? And one of the things that came from Gallup under an article called "The Manager Squeeze: How the New Workplace is Testing Team Leaders," in addition to managers needing to be consistent and clearly communicating, and making sure good is well defined. What's actually going on. Only 3 in 10 managers are agreeing that their supervisor keeps them informed about what's going on in their organization. So, sort of that lack of clarity can burn people out. But also, only 48% of managers strongly agree that they currently have the skills needed to be exceptional at their job. So there was a real need for more training and development. Interestingly, from Gallup, they actually call one of the key skills teaching managers to have meaningful conversations at the right frequency with their teams. And this is in fact exacerbated with hybrid teams. So I'm curious, Kim, even in that example, just to sort of have the conversation around a specific example for folks that might be struggling with this, how often is this manager, this leader having conversations with their team members?
Well, they're not.
And maybe the word meaningful or helpful conversation should be added.
Important. No, one of the many problems in the situation is that as part of trying to regain control of the situation, the leader canceled their the meeting that all employees had, and not only is this leader not having meaningful conversations with their employees, this leader is trying to prevent employees from talking to each other. And
should I say that was number 4, community of shared accountability?
Yeah, there's not only is there no shared accountability, like this leader is actively thwarting community on the team. It's like, it's so awful to watch. And I actually have compassion. This leader is not a bad person. This leader is a well-intentioned person, but has been getting terrible advice from their leadership, has been getting, as you said, like, no communication or poor communication from above, has gotten 0 training and development. And in fact, I felt bad about the situation and offered to coach this leader. And both the leader and the leader's manager said, no, Don't talk.
that was number 3. Sorry, coaching support to prevent burnout.
I wanted to. I like this leader, and I wanted to help. And and maybe like I want to acknowledge maybe I have some ego that they didn't want me to coach them. Like maybe I feel sad about that. But I suggested other people, if not me, like get somebody. But no, that was not
I mean,
what was going to happen.
yeah, I know it's not quite the same thing, but as you were describing that, Kim, it made me think of um, the advice that I got when I was doing my scuba certification, which is never try to help a drowning person by jumping in the water with them.
That is what I did. That is exactly what I did. Oh my God.
Because then there will be 2 people to rescue.
Yes. Yes, it's true. And like the situation upset me so much, it kept me from sleeping for 2 nights while I had COVID. And, yes.
Which is interesting because going back to, what precipitated all of this was we talked about burnout and you said, ooh, feelings of cynicism. What precipitated that? So it was me jumping in without my wetsuit and my mask.
Save a drowning But what do you do if someone is drowning? You got to help.
The whole idea is like learn to throw the life preserver. Like essentially and I think the reason why I think that image was coming to my mind, which is because I think that a huge part of the burnout, I believe, like this is anecdotal. I don't have all of the data of Gallup and these other folks, or maybe they just didn't slice the data.
It's the Rosoff report.
It's the Rosoff report. It is that people do not know how to deal with the emotions of other people. They barely know how to deal with their own emotions.
Yes.
Right now, the workplace is loaded with emotion. It is like
and trauma, not just emotion, but like trauma.
And even if you don't like the word trauma, like people are in pain. There is pain in the world. And you can try to say that it is imagined and like people are relatively well off and they're safe, especially if you're talking about, someone who's working a desk job. Like, there's lots of more dangerous positions to be in.
Yeah.
But it is that is why that image of jumping in the water came to mind, is because I think the idea is it is true that when we suffer and we feel isolated, we are not just twice as bad off, we're 10 times worse off, right? Suffering and isolation is 10 times as bad as suffering alone. And so
You mean suffering and isolation versus suffering together, you mean?
Versus suffering alone. I'm saying suffering and isolation, it is 10 times as bad as the suffering alone. And the balm is like in community, to to have someone there to help you. But if that person also does not have, is also suffering and doesn't have good tools to deal with their emotions, I think that's where you're sort of like dragging each other down. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's almost it's very predictable and almost unavoidable. And there's a question in my mind of like, is it training? Coaching seems like a good idea, but can you get a coach for every person on your team? Probably not. Like most people can't afford to get a coach for every person on their team. Can you get therapy for the people on your team who need therapy? Most insurance companies don't pay for therapy. It's really hard as a manager to know what to do. And I feel strongly about this because for the same reason that you described, Kim, which is like I've had many of these conversations with managers who are in bad situations and almost entirely of their own making, or at least they made it much worse, like their own choices and behavior made it much worse. And you talk to them, and as you peel back the layers, you realize like this person didn't really know what they were doing. They didn't have the tools to deal with it properly. Now they might be so defensive, they're unwilling to hear an offer of help and see it for the life, the life preserver that it is. But you can have compassion for it. You can see it for the sort of tragedy that it is, which is a difficult situation, a nearly impossible one to come out of unscathed, left the person feeling under-resourced emotionally, tactically, etc. And then they made more mistakes, which made the situation worse. And now they're dealing with the consequences of that.
And so how to help? Like let's imagine, let's talk about what to do if you're the burned out manager. But before we talk about that, Let's talk for a moment about what to do if you have a burned out manager who is, you can have some compassion for their burnout, but how do you prevent them from dragging you and your whole team
Yeah.
down with them?
I love that question. And actually, Brandy, are you willing to jump in here too? Because I did want to get your perspective on this. I think one of the things that I really appreciate was even just starting this conversation off and asking Jason where you stood on the definition of burnout and Kim where you stood on the definition of burnout. And so, Brandy, since we both report to these fine folks, maybe we can role play a little bit from that perspective. But before we do, Brandy, since we actually started this conversation talking about how you're still navigating through the impact of COVID, as is Kim, I'm curious, how does having been sick for the past couple of weeks layer into this definition of burnout that we talked about?
I kind of feel like it's just, I will say that there was a point on like Friday evening where Bodhi almost bit somebody at the dog park and I wasn't feeling well and I couldn't stop coughing. And I was like, I'm just all done. Like it's too much. I can't handle anything anymore. It just feels like the past few years have just culminated for me in that moment. And I just felt so defeated. So I think it is really hard to catch up when you have been sick, and then it just also feels like everything is unstable and there is no norm going back to normal. That's how it feels for me. I don't even know what that is. I don't know if that answered your question, but
I'm sorry.
Well, I think it really did. I mean, I know that it's been a hard time, and I think that these moments of just feeling sort of the what's the point. I was having a conversation this morning with someone else about being creative and not necessarily having time for your own creativity. And that when you have time to do things that sort of fill your cup outside of work, how that can bring into the workplace. But when sort of the outside world is also feeling very stressful and unsafe, and the work world is also feeling that way, and then you're sick. The other thing, Brandy, and I don't know if this adds to it for you, is just this feeling of like the cumulative grief and exhaustion of the
yes.
past few years. And so it's not like this is like you were sick and you had a rough week. It's like it's 3 years
Yeah, and I mean, I'm
later.
not a manager right now, but I in my life tend to be kind of the like trash can for other people's problems. So, I think in like one day I had like my brother and two friends all texting me this really terrible stuff. And it's hard. So I imagine it must be like that for some managers where you're having to hold all of these emotions for these other people, but you're barely able to hold your own. And that feels very hard right now. And it does feel cumulative and it doesn't feel like it's going to get better, I think is the biggest issue. But it doesn't feel like there's an end in sight. Time has no meaning at all to me. It all feels very existential.
Yeah, and so first of all, I just want to say, Brandy, if there's anything that we can do to help you feel like we've got your back and that there are many balls you can lay down or toss to us, and we will catch them for you. I hope that you will toss us those balls. I also think like one of the things that can contribute to burnout is this feeling trapped. And I had this when I was sick the last couple of weeks, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm like canceling all these things so that I can recover, but then I'm dreading getting well because I'm going to be so like I'm going to get sick again because there's all this stuff that is piling up." And I have a version of the same feeling sometimes when I go on vacation. I'm like, I'm canceling all this stuff, like, but all these, and I'm not going to check emails. And then like all these emails, 14,000 emails or, and so I think the more we can consciously say, like, we're not going to check all those emails that piled up on our way when we were on vacation. Like, and we're not going to try to catch up after we were sick. We're like going to cancel some things. So the more things that we can take off your to-do list and put on the proactive forbearance list, I think I think that will. I don't know if it'll help. That's what has helped to me when I feel that way.
Brandy and I have had direct conversations about this. I think it's like, it's got to be okay for stuff not to happen. And I know that like sometimes it's existential for the company, but most of the time it's not. And I think there's a lot of like confusion about that, about like when you can drop a ball and not only safely drop that ball, but like ignore that the ball even exists. Like, don't like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's
Forget
not like
about the ball.
Correct. Exactly. It's like, it's
Pop
not
it.
even, yes, that's why the idea of the proactive forbearance list is so potentially powerful. If you do have the psychological fortitude to look at it and feel good about not doing the things. I will say the one downside of proactive forbearance for me is that list is sort of a reminder that I failed. Yeah.
It becomes a to-do list that's still there. It's like
No. Proactive forbearance means I'm not going to do it. I'm never going to do it. Maybe it needs to be.
Maybe it needs that name, because for me, when I think of proactive forbearance, there's an element, and again, this is like my inner critic, but it's just like, it's important. Like,
here's a list of your failures.
No.
Kim, I know that's not the intent. I'm just saying that there's another.
It does take like I think when Jason said you have sort of the psychological fortitude. I mean, I think, for me, my own experiences of burnout, when it does feel like just there is a mismatch between number of hours in a day, my energy level, and the amount of work that has to be done. Like, something is going to give. And what has tended to happen is, because I don't want the ball to drop, what's given is sort of my capacity. And I'm very aware after the last few years and age and what, like, I actually don't have that. Like, I do have to be more selective, and I feel very fortunate. I'm in the kind of role where I can be more intentional, but I'm aware if there was this constant feeling of like, if Brandy's doing, for example, social media is one thing in the docket, it's like, it's not like that's ever something that stops. Right. So feeling like, let's say there's something that is more of an ongoing piece, I do think it takes both the workplace boss saying this is actually a ball that can be dropped, and then it's our responsibility to actually become more okay with the ball being dropped. But I will say that is a practice I have had to do for myself.
I think we need to celebrate it, the ball being dropped. Like, I had a professor at business school who said, if you don't miss a few flights, you're spending too much time at the airport. And so, and that was like incredibly helpful to me, because now every time I miss a flight, I'm like, well, good. That means I haven't been sitting too much time at the airport.
That would get me a divorce.
Yeah.
Yes, I can only do that when traveling alone. When traveling with Andy, I have to be prepared to spend more time at the airport. Like, I feel this way about email. If I don't at least once a week miss an email that I really regret missing, then I'm spending too much time doing email. And so when I miss that email that I do regret missing, like, it's not that I'm pretending that, well, maybe this is a way of pretending that I don't feel regret, but I try to realize that having caught that email would have come at too high a price. And which is me spending 2 hours every day doing email, which is just not, I've got better uses of my time. And so I think part of and I will burn out. If I spend 2 hours a day doing email, I will burn out. I will get pissed off. I'll be grouchy. I'll start replying to emails in the rudest, least care personally possible way, because I'll be resentful of people for sending me. Like, so I think trying to.
So what would it look like to celebrate the splat?
Well, I mean, I will tell you. So I'll give you a very specific example. Like, I've been very eager to to teach a class on management to like help with, this more training and development burnout thing that we were just talking about. I want to teach a class at Harvard Business School on management, because I felt like I learned a lot at business school, but I didn't learn much about how to manage people. And so there's a senior
no
person.
comment on the irony there, but please go on.
So I sent an email to Deb Spar, who is a senior leader at Harvard Business School, and she's like, "Yes, I love this idea. Let's do it." I missed her reply, and she sent me a reply 2 weeks after that saying, "Did you get my email? Missed that one also." And then I was thinking, why did Deb never reply to me? And I did a search and I saw this and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, but luckily Deb is a person who does not have a big ego about people missing their emails. And she laughed and it was like, so it turned into like a funny thing between the two of us. And now we're back on track.
Can I add one more coda to the story?
Yeah.
So as you know, I'm very committed to getting my deadlines met. And as
I'm very
I recall,
committed to missing mine.
Well, but ironically, or if that's even the right word, and I will check with Alanis Morissette if any of our listeners are of that era. Jason is usually our generational checkpoint. But Kim, you would ask me to help put something together because I used to write case studies at Harvard Business School, and you wanted to like put a document into that language. And it was kind of last minute when we talked. It was like a Friday, and then you need something by like a Tuesday, and then I had a very busy Monday. So ordinarily I would have been like working on the weekend, and Kim wants me to do this thing, and I really need to do it, and it's really important, and it's Monday. And then I was like, I'm too busy. Like I'm going to have to start to look at it on Tuesday. And then I checked in with, I can't remember who reached out to whom, but you were like, oh, what I sent was actually good enough already. So I was like, oh my gosh, it actually worked out.
That's
that
a
I
way
had
to celebrate missing your deadline.
I think there's something to it.
Yeah. There's something to celebrating missing, like especially if you're working on not holding yourself, like not being punishing to yourself on deadlines, on forgiving yourself for missing some deadlines.
Yeah.
There's a quotation, I haven't dug deeply into this, that's attributed to Douglas Adams, who wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And the quotation is, I love deadlines. I like the whooshing sound they make as they fly by.
Yeah. So, some people love deadlines. Deadline is not useful to me at all.
But I think there's the spirit of celebrating in that quotation. That's why it popped into my brain, because he's like, there's something beautiful, like you can appreciate that there's like an action, an emotion. You miss the deadline, like something has happened. You can appreciate that moment without beating yourself up about it, right? What this conversation makes me think of is we ask the question, what can you do? If you have a boss who you think is burnt out or burning out, what can you do? And I think the answer to that is take care of your own shit. Take care of yourself. Don't be another drowning person. I know that's not entirely in each of our control, but I think I mentioned this on the podcast before, but I went through a period of time in my life where I was in therapy. I was learning about meditation and mindfulness and all this other stuff. And I had this nagging sense of guilt that I was being very selfish.
Yes.
So I was spending all this time on myself, and I was being incredibly selfish. And shouldn't I be there for my team and spending this time with them? And there's work deadlines that I'm missing because, I'm going to this meditation group on Tuesday nights and all this other stuff. And I kept feeling guilty. And it was, this went on for 9 months. I still did the things because I needed it so badly. In order to get my health back into a reasonable state, I needed to do some things differently, but I was managing this guilt. And it wasn't until the moment that I realized 9 months in that I had a day where I didn't have to deal with my own problems. And instead I solved a problem for somebody else. I wasn't so consumed with what was going on with me that I actually had the brain power available to help somebody with a problem that they were having. And I was like, this isn't selfish, because if I don't do this, I will not have any capacity left for anybody else to do anything. And that's what it was so bad for me that's what was happening. So that's why I'm saying, help yourself. It's not so much about getting the work done or taking a work thing off of your plate. If you can come to work with more capacity for other people, you are doing, you're helping to alleviate burnout by doing that.
And I think this is good advice, whether you have the burned out manager or you are the burned out manager. Yeah. I mean, I had almost the exact same situation where I we've talked about our different happiness recipes, and I had sort of come to realize that I had to get enough sleep and I had to exercise. And that meant that I couldn't exercise in the morning the way I used to, because then I wouldn't get enough sleep. And so I decided that I would go work out at lunchtime at noon every day. And I felt so guilty leaving the office to go work out. And all of a sudden I felt guilty, like when I shut my laptop at 9:30 so that I could be in bed by 9:45 so I could be asleep by 10. I felt guilty then too. And I realized that I had to let go of those feelings of guilt and instead turn it on its head and realize I cannot show up for my team in the way that I need to if I don't shut my computer at 9:45 and if I don't go exercise at noon. Like, I had to do those things, not only for my own sake, but it was not robbing my team in order to take care of myself. And I think that is true whether you are a leader who's trying to be, radically candid and caring about your team. It's also true if you are sort of a follower who needs to speak truth to power. And either way, you need to take care of yourself first.
Yeah, I so appreciate that. And, one of the teachings that really resonated with me is from Tara Brach, who's a mindfulness teacher and a psychotherapist, and shares this idea from Buddhism of two arrows. And the first arrow is the experience that, we as humans might feel, like fear, aggression, greed, and pain. And then the second arrow is actually the self aversion, the judgment that we have the first arrow. So it's like we don't like that we're feeling selfish, or Kim bringing in the idea of pain. And it's like the first arrow is like there will be pain. The first
Yes.
arrow that hurts, but then we shoot the second arrow into ourselves. And so it's really about, we can't control the first one, but we can manage that second one of how we're reacting to the first one. And that those ideas of the two arrows has really helped. And I think going back to the workplace, like the first arrow would be sort of taking my responsibility to be like, okay, if I have to, do this amount of work and do my best to do the work. And then the second arrow, sort of like letting it go and just, and the letting it go splat and the not beating yourself up. But the other thing, Jason, when you're talking about sort of your capacity as the person who might have the manager who's struggling with burnout, and the reason why I brought Brandy in on this in the first place was, Brandy, right now you've been sick. You might not have that capacity for sort of asking upwards, but beyond us managing our own second arrows, that's one thing that, would be helpful for me or for another team member to do. And Jason, I'll start with you. What's one way? And the reason I also ask is managers, it can be hard for leaders to accept help and to ask for help.
Yep.
And I would say that's probably fitting for both you and Kim. And so I'm just asking in that spirit of what's one thing that could be helpful.
That you could do to help us feel less burned out?
That's right.
So one thing that I found to be really helpful when I was feeling burned out was, I remember I had a person who reported to me, came to me, and one, she acknowledged like, "Hey, it seems like you've been under a lot of pressure lately. I need your help with this particular problem. Like, there was a decision that needed to be made. I needed to weigh in on that decision, but it was like the path to actually getting to me being able to weigh in was sort of unclear." And so she said, "This is what would be helpful to me, is um, if you could do these three things." Like, she just gave me a list of like, this is what would be helpful to me. And to me, I saw that as compassion, because what I admitted to her is like, look, it's going to take me a while to figure out how to get there. And she's like, I know. And I think if you do these things, it's going to help. So she wasn't say it wasn't like an act of purely of like generosity on her part, but she saw it as an opportunity to offer me some guidance as to like how I could make the path to helping her as short as possible. And I saw that as like an act of compassion for me. And she, I'm lucky enough to have hired and worked with very smart people in my career. She turned out to be totally right. It was actually quite easy to get her the information that she needed. And I was just stuck because I was so burned out. Like I was feeling like it's trapped, to bring that word back. Um, and I, I think of that now, like when I'm struggling with, when I'm working alongside someone who is seeming burned out, I'll often say, well, here is a concrete thing that was helpful to me or might help me, or here's a way that I know this is really tough, but here's a way that you might approach this that has worked for me in the past. And that sort of suggestion, um, the show of like we're on the same side, even though like I might be annoyed at you, especially if you're my manager because you're not doing everything I need you to do.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, for me, when I feel burned out, it feels to me like I'm totally incompetent.
Mm-hmm.
And when I am burnt out, I feel like even things that would at other moments in my career feel easy, feel impossibly hard. Like everything feels impossible. I mean, I would say probably for me, the most extreme example I had of this was probably like postpartum, like right after the babies were born. Like it
Mm.
felt impossible to drink enough water. It felt impossible to eat. It felt and then I remember I had to give a talk at my high school. We were going back to Memphis we took the kids back and like I do not have a hard time getting up in front of people usually and giving a talk. And this felt terrifying to me.
Mm.
Like absolute. So it's like some version of incompetence and fear of things that ordinarily do not cause me to feel afraid.
Mm.
Um, and and I often, I don't usually react at my best when I'm feeling incompetent and afraid. And so I think like the thing that I need when I'm feeling that way is I think that's why your story is so good, Jason. You had someone who came and said, "Here's what you can do that would be helpful." Like I want to be helpful to people, and I want, so here's the fastest possible way for you to demonstrate your competence.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
and that's why, like Amy, the other day, you said, "I understand now what I can do to show Kim I care is to end on time." Like that was really meaningful to me. Because that is true. Like giving me a few extra minutes back is worth more to me than checking in and seeing if I'm okay. Like I remember at one point I was really burned out. This was when we were shutting down Candor Inc. And I was really burned out and really stressed out. I was like really at my wit's end. Not just at my wit's end. I had lost a ton of weight. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Like I was at my physical rope's end as well. And my my father, who we've talked about, who I love dearly, called me and like yelled at me for why wasn't I turning to him for help and spending more time talking to him about this. And I was like, I just told you what I need from you is like just back the fuck off and let me like try to deal with my own stuff. Like I need time. That's what I need. That's usually when I'm burnt out, I need more time.
Kim, I so appreciate that. And also even just I love hearing about your relationship with your father. And it resonates so much with me because I think, we are so different. And what care personally looks like for me is exactly what is not care personally for you and vice versa. And so like, I feel so, and we both want to help so much. And so for
Yes.
me to hear that I can do something that is helpful for you, it makes me so happy. So with that, I really want to end this podcast so we can get you out and give you a few extra minutes.
Yeah.
That was not a passive
No,
aggressive way of
Yeah.
saying,
No.
I'm tired of
No,
this conversation. I'm enjoying this
No, but
conversation.
I just, first of all, I want to acknowledge, like, even hearing you talk about just your aversion to feeling incompetent. And, I will often think, how can Kim, like, I look at your schedule and I just marvel, how do you do it? And so I hope that our listeners get the same feeling that I had as I listened to you, which is like, managers are people too, leaders are people too. The more that we can see that and acknowledge that, the more we can actually start to look at what would be most helpful for that person.
Yes.
And to really, and by the way, it could be a total win-win because now you've got 15 extra minutes or whatever it was,
Yeah.
So I'm really touched by that. And also, Jason, what you shared before we close, Brandy, since I brought you in on the burnout front, was there anything more that you wanted
to
add?
echo what Kim said about the feeling incompetent. And I think a couple of weeks ago, Kim, you and I talked, and I was like, maybe I'm just doing life wrong. Like, I don't feel like I have time to eat or I can drink enough water. All those things seem very hard for me when I'm burnt out. I don't know how people fit all those things into a day at the best of times, let alone when you're burnt out. So, yeah, just I guess acknowledging that like everybody goes through that. I'm not the only dehydrated person or person who doesn't have time to prepare meals. But it feels like that sometimes. Like, why does everyone else seem fine and I can? Yeah,
why is everyone else drinking all this water?
A sip of water. And then I beat myself up for like relaxing at night. Like, well, I could until bed be doing work, but that's not. I don't want to spend all my time working. It's kind of a vicious circle.
Yes, and I think the only thing we haven't discussed yet about dealing with burnout. So if you're the manager who has burnout, like I'm recommending radical self-care. Like if you're burned out, like I think you have to overcorrect because almost everything you're going to do is going to be an undercorrection. Like the things that seem sensible are going to be an undercorrection. You know what I'm saying? So if it's like, if you feel like therapy twice a month would be better than therapy once a month, but like you only really have time for therapy once a month, you need to do therapy twice a month. Like,
4 times a month.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like everything you're thinking that is reasonable is going to be an undercorrection. If you think, getting out for a walk twice a week would be helpful, getting out for a walk every day is going to be more helpful than getting out for a walk twice a week. So I'm like recommending people think radically about how they can start to recharge their batteries. So that's thing number one. And thing number two that we haven't, that I don't think we talked about at all was the importance of momentum. I think one of the hardest parts about coming out of burnout is it's very easy to slip back in because something's going to go wrong. Things are going to go like you're not at your best, even though you start to feel better. Let's say you start to feel a bit more energized. You've got your own emotional regulation back under control. You're exercising a little bit more. You start to feel a little bit better. You're not at your best. You're not at your peak performance. And so things that shouldn't go wrong are going to go wrong.
Yes.
Not only do you not need to, is it important not to judge yourself about that? I think it's really important to think about how you can break things down into clear, achievable milestones or goals or moments. And Kim, your point about email is like, I think if I was in your shoes, I would say I'm going to, and I was burnt out, but I still need to do email, knowing how much I hate it. I feel like it's robbing me of my time. I would set a thing, which is like, I'm going to do email for 15 minutes at this time of day.
Yeah.
Like that. And when I'm done with that, I'm going to celebrate. I'm going to feel like, yes, I've done that thing, even though I know I didn't want to do it and it was hard, but I did it. I sat down, I did 15 minutes of email. And that seems so trivial when you're like, I'm managing a team of 150 people.
Yeah.
But that's my point about momentum is like the team of 150 is going to be flopping all over the place. Things are going to be going wrong. You're not going to know what's going on, but you can control, like find those things that you can control that you can actually get done, commit to doing them and like tick them off a list. Like for me, physically, like keeping track of stuff on the computer is great for me when I'm not burned out. But when I am burned out, I literally need to cross stuff off a list in order to feel like I've done anything. I need there's like something about the physical, the somatic like reaction that I have of crossing it off the list is satisfying. And so think about those small things you can do to start to build momentum and to rebuild your confidence in your own competence.
Yes.
Right. To be like, I can do things.
Yes. Yeah, I can do things is really important because incompetence is exhausting. And one's
Yes.
own other people's incompetence is exhausting, but one's own incompetence is even more at least for me, is even more
It is.
exhausting.
Yeah.
Like there's one thing that I think, Jason, you and I had this conversation where my phone was running out of battery, and I said, the thing I hate about myself is that I cannot remember to charge my phone. You were very kind when you responded to that. Like you took it seriously.
Well,
And
I was like,
you were so nice to me that I've actually been better about plugging my phone in. So
I was like, I
I've
think
been
it's
nicer
okay.
to myself. Yeah.
Like,
Well, yeah, because your inner rebel's like, stop yelling at me. I'll show you. I'm not going to plug in that effing phone.
That is exactly right, Amy. That is the voice inside
You're like,
my head.
I'll show you a dead phone.
It's like running out of gas. Like I ran out of gas several times when I first started driving because I was like rebelling against. I'm like, what a dumb thing to rebel against. But I was anyway. So yes, I think. And the other thing that I will say on radical self-care that I have found helpful anyway, I don't know if others will, is that not only do I put the things in calendar that I have to do, but I also put the things in calendar that I want to do.
Yeah.
So my calendar looks like I'm super duper busy, but if you'll notice, there's like time for lunch in there. There's time for a walk in there. There's like time to stop working and start, preparing dinner and eating dinner with the family in there. So there's like, and for me, blocking.
There should be things that you look forward to in your calendar.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now,
stop.
Yes. Yeah. And now really almost everything in my calendar I look forward to. So it doesn't burn me out. If more than half the things in your calendar are things you dread, try to make a change.
Well, on that note, let's get into our tips.
All right, let's do it.
To start putting radical self-care into practice.
Tip number 1, radical self-care. Caring for others starts with caring for yourself. Don't beat yourself up or feel guilty for feeling burned out. Give yourself the break you need. You can't possibly care personally about others if you don't care about yourself. And if you are feeling burned out, you need to care about yourself more. So when a mentor of mine said, if I am feeling burnt out, or if I'm in an especially stressful time, I work out twice a day, not once a day. So do more self-care, not less, when you're feeling burned out.
Tip number 2, you don't have to do it alone. Seek community. If you're a manager, you can find a mentor, a coach, peer group, other people who are going through similar things as you for guidance, community, and most of all, support. We don't have to do this alone. It might be self-care, but we can do self-care in community. This can help you build the kind of momentum that Jason was talking about, momentum that will help us build our own confidence in our competence.
Tip number 3, if you're not a manager and you think your manager is dealing with burnout or you're dealing with burnout yourself, tips 1 and 2 apply equally well to you. And I think sometimes it can be easy to imagine that if you just focus on the work, that's the thing that's going to help your boss the most. But we'd argue that focusing on yourself, making sure that you're coming to work with energy and excitement has an equal, if not bigger, impact on the burnout that others around you are feeling.
For more tips, you can go to radicalcandor.com/resources, download our free learning guides, sign up for Radical Candor on Masterclass, and get our lit video book. You can also register for our workplace comedy series, The Feedback Loop, and more. Show notes are at radicalcandor.com/podcast. We like to say praise in public and private, criticize in private. So if you like what you hear, go ahead, rate and review us wherever you find your podcast. And if you have criticism for us, email it to podcast@radicalcandor.com. Kim?
Shall we talk about a few of our favorite things?
Shall we talk about our favorite things?
All right, let's do it. All right, today I want to talk about my blue jeans. I love and have loved since I was like 8 years old, my blue jeans, my Levi's 501 shrink to fit blue jeans. I don't know why I love these jeans so much, but they make me feel happy and calm, not burnt out. I love them. So thank you, Levi Strauss, for my Levi's 501 shrink to fit jeans.
I'm so excited to keep this conversation going. In the meantime, go get your Levi's 501 jeans. And
they're on already, I promise.
Okay.
I'm not sitting here in my undies. Although we could.
But I am.
How did we get there?
I don't know.
All right, with that,
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
The Radical Candor podcast is based on the book Radical Candor, Be a Kick-Ass Boss Without Losing Your Humanity by Kim Scott. Episodes are written and produced by Brandy Neal with script editing by me, Amy Sandler. The show features Radical Candor co-founders Kim Scott and Jason Rosoff and is hosted by me, still Amy Sandler. Nick Carissimi is our audio engineer. The Radical Candor podcast theme music was composed by Cliff Goldmacher. Follow us on LinkedIn, Radical Candor the Company, and visit us at radicalcandor.com.